GG, y'all.
You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast with your hosts Adam Jackson and Patrick Wheelton. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast with your host Patrick Wheelton and Adam Jackson, with a exciting Week 7 show for you today. A lot of close matchups going into Monday night, and a lot of teams that maybe shouldn't have won that squeaked out a victory, Pat, or other teams that were able to solidify themselves and hold off any newcomers on the Monday night game. Brian is the one I'm thinking of against Jake there. But let's anything for Week 7? Anything that you saw, Pat?
I don't think I deserve to lose.
No. But I said that you were unlikely to win, just based on.
Oh, unlikely. Okay. Yeah.
Just going into Monday night.
Yeah, I haven't had that kind of like Monday night thing where I'm like really focused and it comes down to the wire in a very, very long time. The last time it happened was with the Vikings, and it was probably 15 years ago at this point. It was not to bore you with details, but it was an IDP league, and it was a battle.
Oh, God.
My Chad Greenway, linebacker Chad Greenway, against his Jared Allen, and he led. And Brett Favre was like, it was like time winding down. It was fourth down. The Packers needed a touchdown to send it to overtime for me to have a chance. And sure enough, Brett Favre hit a fourth down touchdown. Game went to overtime. Chad Greenway had 2 or 3 tackles in overtime. I pulled ahead and won the championship. So always will remember that one. But
I think
for sure,
watching
Vikings,
that game in your basement of your parents' house.
I think you're right, actually. Now that you say that.
And now, I don't think it was, I don't know how I remember this shit. I don't think it was Greenway. I think it was Kenny Lofton for the Falcons.
Oh, no. That was another, I can't believe you remember that because I didn't. But that was another year, another league. But that wasn't that game. But that was another one, yes, where that happened. Yep. Wow, that's a name for the past.
Right. Kenny Lofton, not the baseball player, the middle linebacker for the
I don't think it was
Falcons.
Kenny Lofton. I don't think it was Kenny.
I'll look it up, but
okay.
Let's get on with the show.
But no, I mean, like it's the greatness of fantasy. You haven't had a close game ever. It seems this year, at least, not your 7 wins. But it's a lot of fun. So the group chat was going last night, which is great, and people were paying attention. So Josh, we should say Josh has just submitted. I suppose Sarah. I don't think Josh has ever sent a text in that group chat. I think it's Sarah is his proxy. So she has uploaded. I'll say kind of a boring video. Regardless of the, it looks like we have a higher quality version now, but kind of boring. Like no kind of like trash talk or like self-deprecating humor, kind of nothing, just right to the point. I guess I appreciate that to some degree, but a little boring.
That's all Josh is all straight to business. That's how I view Josh when it comes to
I thought you were going to say boring.
Fantasy football and shotgunning nice beverages. He's straight to business. So I can respect that. But let's get on with our matchups here.
Speaking of beverages, sorry, I'm in a mood tonight, I think. By the way, so if you've the best diet soda.
This is going to be a 2-hour podcast.
Just so you know, the best diet soda right here, root beer. Diet root beer. There's virtually no difference between regular root beer and diet root beer. So if anyone's looking for a diet soda that tastes good, it's diet root beer. Moving on.
Moving on with that, but good to know. for
I'm channeling my inner Matthew Berry tonight. Okay.
Oh God! So I'm
channeling my inner Matthew Berry.
Keep you on track. It's basically
keep me on a leash.
I'm going to be the Nate Ravitz of this for those remembering back in the day for his show on ESPN. But let's get started here with Charlie's matchup versus Dustin here. Charlie goes on to win, goes 3-4 on the season, 141.46 to 103.46. Dustin goes to 4-3 on the season. Looking at Charlie's squad here, Pat Mahomes finally has that blow-up game that he has been waiting for all season long. Goes plus 30 points, 4 touchdowns through the air, 424 yards through the air, and even adds 30 yards of rushing on the day in their win against the Chargers. James Cook also has a nice day here. Actually scores a touchdown. 13 carries, 56 yards, 3 for 3, 46, and a receiving touchdown. So good day for him. Jacoby Myers, as we've talked about every single week on this show, 7 for 13, 50 yards and a touchdown, remains extremely involved in that Vegas passing attack. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. He remains to be involved. On Monday night, Addison here, 7 for 10, 123 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did get a little banged up, so that'll be interesting to see the practice reports if he can go this week. But had a great day against probably the top defense in the league, so good to see there. And Kendrick Bourne, 6 for 7, 63 yards and a touchdown, fumble loss, but 13 points. You gotta love to see that. And he leads the league this week in points scored with Zach Evans not getting an offensive snap and starting for Charlie here. So great day for Charlie. Could have even been a bigger day if someone like, I don't know, Cam Akers started for him.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Evans didn't get any snaps in this game and ended up being the dynamic duo off the street of Royce Freeman and Darrell Henderson in this one, which is strange because Evans had a nice kind of breakout in that first week, but maybe they felt he was – no, wait, sorry. He did not. I'm thinking of somebody else. He hardly played the week before. So it makes sense for them to go to the veteran Henderson for the kind of the majority of the work, although it was, I guess, was fairly evenly distributed. But regardless, a 0 for Evans is not good, especially I don't know if we can pull this quickly, but how much was Evans on the waiver wire last week? I think he went for a fairly hefty sum
$41
to get $41. That might be the high on the year for waiver claims. So definitely something with Charlie 3-4. That's going to be something to monitor going down the stretch, depleting those resources for somebody who's probably not going to return any value here at all. Speaking of guys returning value, as you mentioned, you did get kind of season high performances, I would say, from James Cook. Actually, he had one that was a little bit better, but 17 fantasy points. He did look good in this game. And Kendrick Bourne for the Patriots. Juju Smith-Schuster has been out, and Bourne has been kind of handling his duties while he's been out. So whether or not this can continue is to TBD. Schuster should be coming back, but it's 14 fantasy points last week, 13 this week. Touchdowns, I guess just one touchdown this week. A lot of green matchups coming up, though, so it'll be interesting to see if Bourne is able to maintain relevance. 6 targets in this one, 11 targets last week, so kind of on the upswing. Not sure whether or not he'll be usable, but he was usable this week, and he helped Charlie put up that gaudy point total.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at his squad here, it looks like it was a bye-heavy week for him with Derrick Henry, Damian Harris being lost to injury, Robert Woods, Tyler Boyd all on bye. So this was a bye-heavy week for Charlie, and he still scores the league high in points this week. So good on Charlie there, having his fill-ins, having some depth that can actually produce points for him and getting a win, now going to 3-4, right in the thick of it in terms of the playoff push and trying to grab that last spot in the playoffs with a couple more weeks to go, well, a lot more weeks to go, but we're around the midway point. So good to see Charlie there trying to get above 500 for the first time this year, I think.
I know you can't see it, but
Sure.
also Deebo Samuel missed this game on the IR list for Charlie. So even more impressive, doing it without Henry, doing it without Deebo. Big points across the board. You said, as you said, Mahomes too. We shouldn't cut him short. I mean, clearly his best game by far of the season.
Yeah.
With again some really juicy matchups coming up. A lot of potential blowouts of teams or high scoring affairs against the likes of Miami, potentially Philadelphia. So a lot of big matchups coming up. And hey, Charlie's in the thick of this. What do you think of this team? I mean, we got, like I said, really good performances from some guys, some season highs. Addison, Bourne again. I mean, does Charlie have enough
I like
here
that,
to
born
is he
again.
going to born again? I mean, Charlie is born again after this performance. Is he going to have staying power? Is he going to be able to stick around that 500 mark for the rest of the season?
I think the main thing here is just looking at his squad here. So he has Debo that you'd slide in here. Is Justin Jefferson going to be coming back? I know that there were some like rumors that he like might not come back this year as he's looking for a new deal if he's not 100%. That was a while ago, so I don't really know. But I think it really does hurt his Jordan Addison's value. He was doing great with them actually before, but I really think that you won't get these 27 to 30 point games with Justin Jefferson on the field. I think that Charlie just needs one of these three kind of wide receivers between Jacoby Myers, Addison, and Kendrick Bourne just to be solid, just to be around 10 to 15 points a game. And I think that, he could be a dark horse here to really make a run. As we were looking at Derrick Henry on bye, you still got Damian Harris, you got Debo that's hurt. So he does have reinforcements coming in here, and he scored the most amount of points with Keenan Allen having his worst game of the season thus far, which he's been a monster this year. So even with that, he scores enough points. Very talented team. It's just, can one of these wide receivers really solidify themselves? I'm just concerned with Charlie that they might go back into their old ways, Jacoby Myers or Kendrick Bourne being, 5 for 40 yards and no touchdowns. Kind of the Cinderella turning back into a pumpkin kind of thing. But as of right now, enjoy the ride, Charlie. It's going well. But let's go over to Dustin's side here. Dustin went with Sam Howell to start. That was a bad decision. 22 of 42, 249 yards and an interception on the day. Jamar Gibbs.
Hold on. It was a good decision. Just a really bad result. Like, okay. I would have made the same call. Wouldn't you have, right? Sam Howell against the Giants and Kirk Cousins against the 49ers' vaunted defense, right? You would have made that call too, right?
That's fair. Well, it ended up not being the right decision. I guess that's a better way to say it. Jamar Gibbs has his best game as a pro here against the Ravens. 11 for 68 and a touchdown. 9 for 10 in the air for 58 yards for 23 points. Jonathan Taylor is finally back fully, it seems. 18 carries, 75 yards, and a touchdown on the day. Puka Nacua, after having a down game last week, goes right back to his top 10 status here. 8 for 12, 154 yards receiving on the day. But now for the bad here. Marquise Brown has another down game here after, a very solid, 4 weeks before the last 2 weeks. He only scores 6.4 points. Jalen Waddle gets hurt in this game, comes back, but wasn't really the same. 6 for 6, 63 yards in their loss against Philadelphia. And, you're looking at Gabe Davis here, 1 for 5, 6 yards. I don't really know. I mean, looking at Dustin's roster here, who are you starting? I mean, he did have Jamar Chase on bye, so obviously Gabe Davis is just a bye week fill-in. But my main question for you, for Dustin, is he has 3 quarterbacks on this roster. Is Deshaun Watson droppable?
Yeah, 100%. I would say so. I mean, it seems likely, at least possible, that he will end up on IR again. I think that kind of the smoke signals coming out of Cleveland don't seem to be very positive on Watson's prospects for playing in the next few weeks. So it's possible that he lands on IR. Regardless, the fact that he's got Kirk Cousins on this roster, the way they run that offense through Cousins, the way that he, 45 passing attempts, he would have loved to him to get that third touchdown this week, but it wouldn't have mattered on the bench anyway. But I think Cousins is a guy that you can confidently trot out there in most weeks. I mean, he hasn't had his bye yet, but he is the number 6 quarterback in fantasy football. So I absolutely think that he's droppable, yes.
Okay, so just looking at Dustin's prospects here, now 4-3. Obviously a disappointing loss in a game that he probably thought he should win, just with some of the bye week stuff here with Charlie. How are we feeling about Dustin's team? Are we still feeling good? Jalen Waddle's sort of kind of been a disappointment. Now the 36th ranked wide receiver in fantasy football, not where you drafted him, which was around the second round. So definitely a disappointment there. How are we feeling about Dustin's team going forward?
I'm still feeling great about Dustin's team. I really like what he's got here. Again, the player you didn't mention because the desktop interface sucks. Yes, but Kyren, for those of you who don't know, I look at my phone on these podcasts. Adam he uses his monitors. He's on a desktop. You cannot see players in IR on the desktop on other people's teams. So that's why sometimes
their desktop app is
the IR player.
Like from 2016. I feel like they haven't touched it in like 7 years.
It's hot garbage. It's really terrible. But yeah, so Kyren Williams, right, goes down, lands on IR. Initially, when he got hurt last week, it was supposed to be, maybe he'll play this next week, and then all of a sudden he gets put on IR. It's, I think it was is it a hamstring or it's an ankle? So yeah, that's right, it's an ankle. So you kind of look at that and say, well, yeah, that makes sense that maybe it's not going to be a 1 week absence for Kyren Williams. He does go on IR. He will miss 4 games. I believe it's 5 weeks that he'll miss because he has a bye week in there as well. But kudos to Dustin. I mean, he's made some really incredible pickups. He spent a lot of money. And 3 days ago, he picked up Darrell Henderson. Again, Kyren Williams goes down. Dustin is able to scoop his backup out of the pile for free. Mind you, this was on just a couple days ago, so I guess it was Saturday or Sunday morning, possibly. But he had a great game. I mean, 18 for 61. He scored. He caught a ball. So and he knows this offense, right? This is an offense that he played in previously, in previous years. So kudos to Dustin for kind of sticking to it and bringing the guys on this team that he needs. I mean, we're seeing what Puka Nacua has done. That was a waiver wire priority. And then finally, you see what Jahmyr Gibbs could do. He was like the player this year that a lot of the fantasy community has been waiting and hoping to see what he can do. And I think you finally saw that. Even in a tough matchup against the Ravens, he's able to go for 68 yards on just 11 carries and caught 9 of 10 through the air, which is incredible. So you're definitely hoping to see more of that if you're Dustin. But I think he's got enough talent here throughout his team and on his bench that he can continue to be relevant.
My only thing with Jahmyr Gibbs is that the game script was so weird in this game where the Ravens were up 21 points after a quarter. I don't think there's going to be a lot of game script like that, so I don't know if you're going to see as much receiving as you did in this game going forward. I think it was just a kind of a weird game here. He had the most targets and most receptions of the season in a single game this week. I don't know if you're going to see it that much. Same thing with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think we're going to talk about him once we get to there, but he had a season high in targets as well. Don't think you're going to see that as much just because the game script was so weird with Baltimore really punishing the Lions early and often. But let's go.
Yeah, but there's to some degree, though, 9 for 10. Like, sure, he's not going to get 10 targets every week, but could he get 6? Could he get 5 or 6 and catch 4 of those? I mean, if you're the Lions and you see him do that, you see the rapport and clearly the preparation was done so that he's ready to come in and be as efficient as he was. I mean, if Goff trusts him, I'd say go back to that well. We'll see what Dan Campbell chooses to do.
Well, Dan Campbell has not been very honest in terms of running backs thus far. They draft a running back in the first round, and then they go to old, reliable David Montgomery when he is available. So kind of a hard situation to read there in Detroit. And it will especially be hard when David Montgomery does come back to see what Jahmyr Gibbs' role will be. But let's go over to our next matchup here, and that would be Sarah defeating Tom here in a very highly contested matchup in terms of records. Sarah now going to 5-2 on the season, 131.94 to 116.98 for Tom. Tom now going 3-4 on the season, which is kind of surprising when you look at his roster, I would say. But going through the Sarah's team here, we were kind of talking in the group chat, why would you drop Daniel Jones? And she was like, well, he's not playing this week. I was like, well, good point. Pick some suitable replacement here. Gets with Derek Carr, 33 for 55, 301, and a touchdown, 2-point conversion. 17 points for, probably your third option at quarterback, because you'll take that any day of the week. Jerome Ford has a good day against Indianapolis, and a game that no one really saw coming from either side. 11 carries, 74 yards, and a touchdown. A.J. Brown on Monday night. That bet is looking really, really bad for me right now. I think he wasn't going to be a top 15 wide receiver. I think that's what I was saying. He is now number 3 on the season with a 10 for 15, 137 yards, and a touchdown on the day. And then, quietly here, Courtland Sutton, 6 for 6, 76 yards and a touchdown. He now has 5 touchdowns on the season. Very quietly. Everyone talks about Jared Jeudy in that Denver offense, and Courtland Sutton is just quietly just amassing points each week in and week out. 5 total touchdowns now for Courtland Sutton. So he's definitely a viable flex option, wide receiver 3 going forward for Sarah. Yeah, and then looking at her bench, you got A.J. Dillon, 15 carries. You got K.J. Osborne, 5 for 6. If Addison is hurt, his value is going to go way, way up for that offense. So yeah, great day for Sarah here, 131, and goes to 5-2.
Yes, she does, and I'm really happy for Sarah. Sarah's team has been my favorite story, I think, this year in our fantasy league. We talk about it every week, but unfortunately, yeah, no one cares about your 7-0.
Not the undefeated.
Nobody cares about your 7-0. People are tired of your 7-0. They're tired of your 5-0 and your 6-0 and your 7-0. We're all tired of it. We're all hoping you lose. There, I said it. Fucking said it. No, but half of us weren't able to get the job done, so fair enough. But anyway, you did bury the lead here, I have to say, because Jerome Ford was one of those roster acquisitions that Sarah made after the injury to Chubb, who she had on her fantasy team. Ford is now hurt, and it looks like he's probably going to miss a week or two. But you never know with running backs and how they get banged up. It is an ankle injury, so just like we saw with Kyron Williams, you never know. That initial 1 week, maybe he misses next week, could turn into an IR stint. You just don't know until we get more information.
Yep.
So that's a big loss, needless to say. Kenneth Walker for Seattle has been playing great, playing his draft position, I think, for Sarah, but she does need to still fill that other slot. Now, what we can say for her right now is she's got a couple options all of a sudden on the bench. A.J. Dillon of the Packers, who everybody kind of left for dead, and knowing that Aaron Jones was going to be coming back. Aaron Jones is still not quite right, and A.J. Dillon is getting workload. He had 20 carries a couple weeks ago in week 5. He had 15 carries this week in week 7. The matchups have been pretty good, but regardless, he's maintained approximately a 4-yard per carry average, and he scored in week 5 as well. So potentially an option there. 15 carries. I mean, that's startable no matter what team you're on. We saw that with Amari DiMercato. And she's also got Evan Singletary here, who I'll just say he's coming off a bye. He's at Carolina, good matchup, and he had 12 carries in week 5. So week 6, I'm sorry, against New Orleans. So potentially also a guy that you could slot in there.
I think the biggest thing for that is, you're looking at his snap count from the previous games, and you hit week 6 and it goes up to 54 in a game that they were very close in with New Orleans. So you would think that, they were ahead. They did win that game. You would think that Dameon Pierce would get more run, but it looks like this is becoming a 50-50 split now, and it could get worse if Pierce does not get any better. So definitely a little sneaky play there. Devin Singletary, she did draft him in the 12th round in terms of, she didn't pick him up or anything. A.J. Dillon, kind of interesting, I would say. Probably low end, or not low end, but I would say like running back 3. He's not going to catch the ball at all, which is a problem. And he plays Farming Simulator on Twitch, so I don't know if you saw that video where he was up at 2 o'clock in the morning playing Farming Simulator on Twitch, and that really bothered some people, but it was really funny to me. Yeah, but he's not really involved in the passing game. He 34 yards is his high for the season, which was this week. But yeah, he's just kind of like a guy. You hope he falls in the end zone. He only has 1 rushing touchdown in the season, so you hope that he gets that goal line work more in a struggling Packers offense, which really struggled against Denver, which, as we know, Denver is not a good defense.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing I want to point out from this game. When you're 5-2, when you're 7-0, you need some things that actually work out really well for you. Guys that you drafted low that ended up working out in a big way. And we should not forget here Sam Laporta. I feel like he's kind of flies under the radar. He's the number 3 tight end in fantasy right now. He was drafted. I just did a quick count. I think he was the 14th tight end off the board on draft day, going in the 14th round. So Sarah, starting him while he's performing well, and he's done well against some actually pretty good opponents when it comes to scoring against or scoring for tight ends. So we'll have a bye in a couple weeks, and then some actually good matchups to finish the season out. So just a great pick that Sarah loaded up at the end of her draft with an extra tight end. And he's been a big factor in the reason that she's 5-2.
100%, and really rewriting the book on rookie tight ends. He has been very successful this season. He looked really good actually Sunday when he did catch the ball. So he did have Kyle Hamilton on him, which is a tough matchup, but still able to score 8 points in that matchup. You'll take that from a tight end every single day. But let's go over to Tom here. Lamar Jackson has a huge day, probably his best game in like 2 to 3 years, I would say. 21 for 27, 357, 3 touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. Starts Ingram here, does not get a carry. I don't even think he was on the field. It doesn't look like that he had any snap percentage for Arizona's team after a week after he, had 10 rushes for 40 yards. So not really expecting much from him, but definitely expecting more than a 0 here. Stephon Diggs has an all right day, 6 for 12, 58 yards and a touchdown. Devontae Adams, gets the targets, but not very efficient, only 57 yards there. Darren Waller does get in the end zone here, 7 for 8, 98 yards and a touchdown. Rashid Rice, 5 for 6, 60 yards and a touchdown. Tom now goes to 3 and 4, and he did throw in a message here. All his wide receivers are available for a running back, so definitely kind of desperate for some running backs here with Pierce struggling and David Montgomery out. I don't know how long more he'll be out. He's rolled out for week 7. He'll probably come back after the bye. Their bye is in week 9, so probably targeting week 10 for David Montgomery there. My question for you is, Darren Waller, do you think that it's better for Darren Waller's value to have Tyrod Taylor more than Daniel Jones?
I don't know. I don't know that the stats necessarily bear that out per se. Daniel Jones, I think more than anything, Daniel Jones has just underperformed this year, and I
Yeah.
think he could get back to the level that you were expecting. I mean, he's good for 6, 7, 8 targets minimum per game with either of these two guys for the most part, barring a couple. But I don't know. I don't think it matters one way or the other. But one thing we can say, Waller has been pretty good. He is tight end number 5
Yeah.
in the league, so he is definitely. I don't know that I would knock him whether who's starting at quarterback. But I don't know. Look, Tom has had some bad luck. You mentioned it when you introduced his team. He is third in the league with points against, so not quite Brian, who's given up only person to give up 900 points, but Tom is not too far behind at about 849. So he could have won this game. That you mentioned Keontae Ingram, very weird situation. He was like the third running back that we've had in this week that didn't play. Right. I forget who we just talked about, but then you got the Bijan situation with the headaches, and Ingram, who knows what happened to him. I mean, DeMarcado, I said when I picked him up the week before, and then he did nothing. I said, well, I'm going to hold on to him because he actually played the most snaps of the 3 backs last week. So I said, I'm going to hold on to him. And sure enough, he all of a sudden is now the guy that you want. So Ingram relegated back to bench duty in this one. Really sucks to take a 0 and then only get 5 fantasy points out of Alexander Mattison. I mean, granted, you knew that matchup was going to be difficult, but with the way the Vikings played them and the burst that he actually had, I think most of us were watching that game. I thought he looked good on the limited work that he had.
Obviously, they're not that big of a fan if they're going to bring in Cam Akers, is what I'm kind of thinking in terms of the coach side. Why would you bring in someone that might be a headache for the coaching staff? He was probably a headache for the coaching staff in LA. Why would you bring that guy in if you were fully confident in Alexander Madison? Now the 20th ranked running back here in fantasy, which is actually better than I thought he was. He was drafted in the 5th round, so you're expecting a little bit more, I would say, out of that. His snap count has been, I guess it's kind of trending down. That week 6 is kind of an outlier with an 80%, but 3 out of 4 weeks, 69, 51, and 53 last week. Cam Akers is starting to get more run, so definitely would be concerned there. Cam Akers' snap percentage was his highest of his Vikings career thus far at 39%. So I don't know what's going to happen with that with Madison, but Tom has some real issues at running back with Dave Montgomery now out, Dameon Pierce now losing work to Devin Singletary. He might lose the job to Devin Singletary. And Ingram, who knows? He'll probably have 20 carries next week just because nothing makes sense. And then Madison with Cam Akers. Just a lot of stuff going on with Tom's team. Very talented at the wide receiver position. Probably need to flip one of these guys. You could either go name recognition, get more value with Diggs or Adams, or you can kind of go down the third tier of running backs and maybe flip a Zay Flowers or Rashid Rice and work from there. But he probably does need to make a move to survive this part of the season.
Yeah, I mean, is this I wouldn't even know who he could go get, but I mean, running backs are so hard to come by. But if you can find somebody in the league that has 5 of them that are potentially startable, then maybe you could work something out. I mean, of the guys here, in the wide receiver core, just from a trade value and realistic standpoint, like which one of these guys do you think maybe he would be willing to part with for, say, I don't know, someone of the Dameon Pierce kind of middling, but just gets the workload, is able to put some points on the board, or any of these guys that people could target?
Well, it's kind of like a cliff kind of scenario here. So you got Stephon Diggs and Adams, who you're probably not trading unless you're getting a top 15 back. I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe close to the top 10. Flowers, he has value in this league just because he is a Baltimore Raven. I hate to kind of say that, but that does kind of bump up a little bit of value there. And Rice is just coming on now. You probably want to hold on to him just because I think the good days are ahead for Rice. When I'm thinking, I don't know if I would do this, but I'm just throwing this out there. Devontae Adams for like a Joe Mixon. Is that like around where we're like thinking?
Probably.
That's kind of. I have Joe Mixon, so I'm not saying Tom do that or not because I'm not sure if I would do that. But that's kind of around the value you're looking at. That running back that at least has a hold on the team, on the room, but it has been underperforming. So I think that's what you're looking at there. You're not going to get the top 10 guys because they're just so valuable, but somewhere around there, the 15 to 18 is probably where you're looking. If you don't want to get rid of those two, then you're going to be looking at guys like, I don't know, Algier. Who else? It's so hard to think. Like maybe a Najee Harris.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about Najee Harris because he's actually kind of surprisingly been good, which is kind of which has been surprising, but he's been surprisingly good. So on to our next matchup since we've taken up way too much time so far. Who are we gonna go to? There. Okay, we'll go to me. So I go to 7-0, as that's not been mentioned at all during the show. 117.66 to 86.46. I go to 7-0, and Alex goes to 1-6 on the season. Recent trade acquisition. Justin Herbert does not have a good game. Actually has his worst game of the season. 7 for 30, 259 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions on the day. Alvin Kamara continues to be a PPR monster out of the backfield. 17 carries, 62 yards, 12 for 14 through the air, 91 yards, and a 2-point conversion. Tyreek Hill, 11 for 15, 88 yards, and a touchdown. Could have had and should have had another touchdown on the day. In that game, he just dropped the ball over the middle. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 13 for 19 targets, 102 yards. You'd like to see that there. Josh Palmer, who was the fill-in for recently departed Mike Evans, 5 for 7, 133 yards. He had the most yards for the Chargers on the day. And then even kind of quietly, Ramondre Stevenson here only gets 9 carries, but is back involved in the passing game. 6 for 6, 51 yards on the day. So 117, that's good enough to win, obviously, but it's kind of a middling score. Obviously, 7-0, happy, can't complain. It's just, it's so funny. Whoever the quarterback I put in, they do bad. So I'm having some bad negative voodoo in terms of quarterbacks here throughout the start of the season.
Yeah, kind of not great. Not a great start for Herbert on your squad here in this game, and in a game that you thought was going to be a shootout. He just didn't do a lot of the shooting on that one. It was more of the Mahomes show.
Well, maybe shooting yourself in the foot. But...
He did maybe do a little bit of that. Yeah, 17 for 30. Not great efficiency through the air. I feel like your team is so consistent. I feel like all the stuff that I would want to talk about is all stuff that we've talked about already on this team. I mean, your starters, your lineup pretty much sets itself. There's not really a whole lot of decisions to make, especially during these bye weeks. But
I have
bravo.
A decision for next week. Do you
next
start
week? The buys.
Well, no, but all my running backs don't have buys. So do you start Joe Mixon over Ramondre Stevenson? Joe Mixon against San Francisco, and then you have Ramondre Stevenson versus Miami. So it's plus matchup versus where's the, yeah, it's hard, right?
Well, plus matchup for Ramondre.
Yeah.
Yeah, but don't you think
he's going to catch the ball in the backfield? 100%.
You think it's going to be one of those like 9 for 10s that we just talked about with
I could definitely
whoever
see
we just
that.
talked?
And it doesn't seem that Joe
Yeah.
Mixon's really that involved under the backfield. Joe Mixon's high targets is 5. His high yardage is 36 in terms of receiving. So not really that much involved in the passing attack.
I
But
mean, might be a coin flip for sure, but definitely a decision that you don't mind having, I would say.
yeah,
Speaking of decisions, Deontay Johnson all of a sudden might be presenting decisions in future weeks. He comes back from injury, returns from IR with a 5 for 6, 79 yards against the Rams. So I'm sure you feel pretty good getting him back. Pickens has been so great in that offense in his absence and continues and probably will still be great. But are you encouraged by 5 for 6 for 79 from Deontay Johnson?
yeah. I mean, obviously, first game coming back, you definitely want to see that type of stat line. Um, he seems allergic to the end zone. I don't know, like if they just don't throw to him or they just take him off the field. But I mean, he didn't have a he didn't have a receiving touchdown last year. Like,
That's right.
and he played in all the games last year. So just kind of interesting there. Um, Definitely like it. I just don't know how high the ceiling is, and I think the floor is pretty low. Um, that Steeler offense is very notoriously can go hot and cold. Kenny Pickett is not the future there in Pittsburgh. I don't think he's shown that yet. So, you like the six targets. I just don't know how much I feel comfortable with him starting him, other than against a guy like Josh Palmer, who I feel like is just going to get those targets and they get pass happy and they. Even when they're up, I feel like they're still going to throw. They're not going to rely on the rushing attack. So, um, yeah, it's just he's a nice bench spot. He'll be a bye week fill in for sure when Tyreek and those players go into the buys. Um, it's just I just don't know how high his ceiling is just being in that offense.
For sure. For sure. Well, I mean, you continue to get production out of your Dolphins, at least one of them. This was a low week for Raheem Mostert in a loss. They were playing catch up a little bit to the Eagles. Only 9 carries in this one for just 5 fantasy points. Um, you've got Wilson potentially coming back here any week. I think he was not activated yet.
No, he was. He was
Um,
activated last week. He was on the
he
field.
was didn't
He had a carry.
didn't play too much, right?
Yeah, he only
Maybe a
had like one
carry.
carry. Yep.
Are you nervous at all? Like, how are you feeling about Mostert? Because he's a really interesting guy. Number one, we have to factor in his age. He's 31. He's doing things at the running back position that at that age are very few and far between are able to accomplish that. He has had an injury risk throughout his career. He's been an injury risk late in the season. You've got A-Chain, who maybe A-Chan, sorry, will be back in a couple weeks potentially. And you've got Wilson returning. Like, what's your like confidence level in Raheem Mostert moving forward rest of season?
Not worried about Wilson. I think that he's just a better player than Wilson at this stage in both their careers. Um, you know, Achan, I am concerned about him cutting into the work, but when both of them were on the field, they were both very good. Like, I think that he's a high end, or at least a solid running back two with Achan on the field anyway. Both are splits together. They were, doing. I think when he was on the field, that's when he scored his 41 points. So it's like, you kind of just believe it until he does something to make you not believe it. And right now, number 2 overall running back, and I drafted him where in the 10th round. Great value for that. I'm just going to keep on riding it while he's being productive, is basically. He'll be in the starting lineup until he proves me wrong. Um, but enough about my team. Let's go over to Alex's team, which is one of the weirder things I can remember in fantasy football, in terms of everyone and every fantasy analysis person really dropping the ball here. Bijan Robinson gets 1 carry for 3 yards, and it was like I think it was the last carry of the game before they kicked the game-winning field goal.
He was.
So crazy there. He was having migraines, and just the latest news 21 hours ago, Bijan Robinson's health handling by Falcons being investigated by the NFL. So that's kind of interesting there. Don't really know what they're supposed. I mean, he wasn't out on the field. He was just, had a headache. It seemed like he had a migraine, which we've seen in the past from likes of Percy Harvin, who struggled with migraines. So we do hope for the best for Bijan and return back to the field. But the rest of his squad here, Alex's squad, Jonathan Jacobs, or Josh Jacobs, not Jonathan Jacobs. Josh Jacobs here, 11 for 35, now the 14th ranked running back. You draft him in the second round here. Definitely need more out of that, and it just doesn't really make any sense to me. Hasn't gone over 4 yards per carry this season in a game, which is very, very interesting to me. Just not as explosive as he was last year, and I don't really know what the issue is there.
Yeah, and it's worse that you even say. I mean, not yet 4 yards a carry. I mean, his high on the year, his high is 3.65, like not even close to 4 yards a carry.
Right.
Add that to the fact that his targets in recent weeks have been going down. His receptions have been going down. He hasn't scored through the air all season. He only has 2 rushing touchdowns. Like, weird year. I mean, this is a year where he still has let's see, what's his high game on the year? He had a really good 23-point fantasy performance. So you're like, great, he's back. And then since then, it's just been downhill.
Yes. And just something to keep in mind here with Jacobs here, low snap count in this game. That could have been game script, just trying to get the passing down backs involved. But, you don't like to see that trending in that direction, especially when they're struggling. Just something to keep an eye on for Alex here. Definitely something he can't afford now at 1-6. Probably needs to win out, or he can only lose one more game if he wants to make the playoffs. But just like we were speaking about, George Pickens, 5 for 8, 107 yards. Definitely seems to be one of the few bright spots for Alex, and one of the really solid picks later in the draft that he made has really been working out. He seems to have a good rapport with Kenny Pickett there in Pittsburgh. George Kittle on Monday night, 5 for 7, 78 yards. That's not spectacular, but for tight ends, it is. He is now the 7th ranked tight end on the day, or on the year, after a 0.6 performance last week and then a 26-point performance against Dallas in Week 5. So just kind of an interesting kind of tidbit there. Did have a couple people on bye. Ferguson, who he probably wasn't going to start anyway, and T. Higgins, who probably you had Elijah Moore start for. Just rough sledding for Alex, and the Bijan Robinson thing was just the cherry on top for what really has become a disappointing season.
Yeah, really rough. And when it rains, it pours. At 1-6, Trevor Lawrence hasn't been. We talked earlier about to be good in fantasy, you need some luck with some lower guys you drafted lower on the board, succeeding despite that low draft position. But on the converse, you've got Alex with a bunch of guys who have just been underperforming. I mean, Bijan Robinson, as good as he has been, as much as he has shown potential, he's not being used very well, I think, or as many people expected in that Atlanta offense. And he's been somewhat of a disappointment given his draft position and his upside. Trevor Lawrence has not been good. Josh Jacobs, we already talked about that. So just a lot of guys. George Kittle even, drafted more as like a 5 tight end and hasn't quite hit expectations. So just a storm of underperformances for Alex that's sort of gotten him to this point.
Yeah, and I didn't even talk about him, but DeAndre Swift here, he couldn't have had a better day against Miami. I mean, I know he scored 9 points, but this was the first game in 6 weeks that he scored under 10 points. So he could have even had a bigger day. I thought he looked pretty good. He just kind of stopped handing him the ball, which is kind of weird. Starting to go to Kenneth Gainwell actually later in that game. for whatever reason. But want to see more points. You want to see more domination of the backfield for DeAndre Swift there for Alex. It's just unfortunate now. Just looking at his bench, there's nothing really there. I mean, does he have anyone on IR?
Nope.
Okay, so nobody on IR. T. Higgins is probably the only viable starter out of his bench. You got Elijah Mitchell, who's doing nothing as long as Chris McCaffrey's there. Josh Reynolds, who was a hot waiver pickup early in the season, has kind of been relegated back down to where he probably should be. Jared Goff struggles outdoors. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. In a dome, he's pretty good, but outdoors, not so much there. So interesting for Alex. Now at 1-6, probably needs to win out and maybe can lose one more game if he wants to get in the playoffs, but most likely needs to win out for Alex. So let's go to our next matchup here, which would be Brian versus Jake here. The battle of the 1-5s. Brian now goes to 2-5 on the season with 117.56 to 104.90. Jake now goes to 1-6 on the season. Looking at Brian's squad here, Jalen Hurts has a great day here, 23 for 31, 279 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a touchdown on the ground against Miami there. Kareem Hunt, with Jerome Ford going out of this game, scores 2 touchdowns on the day, 10 for 31. Hold on one second. Keeps on closing on me for some reason. 10 for 31, 2 touchdowns, does not get involved in the passing attack. Terry McLaurin, 6 for 9, 90 yards. With that struggling Commanders offense, you'd like to see that at least he's still a viable option. Travis Kelce with the biggest tight end day probably of the season. 12 for 13, 179 yards and a touchdown. I was listening to, I think it was First Take or something, one of those, horrible ESPN shows that they were literally like, why aren't you just the Chargers? Why aren't you just following him with a safety and a linebacker? He needs to be double covered every time. He was running like wide open. It made no sense to me. But good for Brian here. Kind of, sort of, justifying the number 2 pick. Now he's the number 1 overall tight end after missing week 1. Has scored over 15 points in his last 3 contests. So like to see that for Brian here. Looking on his bench, doesn't start Josh Downs, 5 for 6, 125 yards, and Dallas Goedert also involved, 5 for 5, 77 yards, and a touchdown on the day. So good news for Brian, gets off the snide, gets the second win of the season. I would say better. There's more better here than bad, but there are some spots here that are concerning for Brian.
Yeah, Travis Kelce, look, 29 fantasy points. All I can say is his fantasy points aren't the only thing that goes up when Taylor is around.
God help me.
With 29 fantasy points. She was there. I'm just saying she was in the audience. She was in the booth.
I'm gonna have to make this podcast explicit.
No, we keep it clean here on the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast. But no, all jokes aside, Brian, of the kind of the lower end teams in the league currently in 10th place, I feel like this team still has enough talent and enough indicators pointing in the right direction for some of these players that if Brian puts together a little bit of a streak here, he may be able to sort of jump back into the mix potentially. Who am I talking about there? I'm talking about Javonte Williams, who all of a sudden, after a couple weeks of kind of struggling with injury and giving some work up to some other backs in that system, he sort of reclaims that lead role, going 15 for 82, having a really nice game here as the Broncos unexpectedly get a win against the putrid
And my
Packers.
favorite stat, season high in snap count. He's
go.
back.
Tells the story.
Yeah.
Tells the story for sure. So Javonte Williams looking up. Speaking of that, we talked about the injury to Jerome Ford earlier for Sarah's team. Well, the converse here, I've said converse twice in the last 2 minutes. That's weird. Kareem Hunt. The other side of the coin, maybe I could say. On the other hand, Kareem Hunt 15 fantasy points and scores twice. And he's pointing up because of the Ford injury. So Kareem Hunt in that Browns backfield, has an opportunity to sort of be the focus guy. Although it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if they've got somebody else. I think Strong is the other guy in that offense.
Pierre Strong.
It'll be interesting to see if Hunt just stays in his role. I think probably maybe that's more likely the case.
I will say one thing, and this is just me watching like the fourth quarter of that game. Strong looked pretty good as well. So I think this could be more of a split than you think. I still think it's going to be like 60-40 Hunt to Strong, which is more than enough viable for what you're probably going to use Hunt for, which is a flex, because just look at Brian's bench here. You got Breece Hall coming back. You got Tajay Spears coming back, who, I've read a couple things where he's the hot waiver wire pickup. So obviously the fantasy football analysts like him for some reason. So maybe a viable option going forward. But, looking at his squad, didn't really had a lot of running back question marks. Now is very solid at the running back position, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think solid enough potentially at the wide receiver position. None of these guys excite me, but I think just the looking across the board, Devontae Smith has not been good, but I think everybody, if I had to say, I think most in the fantasy community would expect that to even out a little bit more, that maybe he's underperformed. He's definitely due for a solid game. He hasn't scored since week 2. So he's definitely got his fantasy points are going to come to him eventually. And then on the bench, he makes the curious decision here to start Michael Wilson, the wide receiver for the Cardinals, in a good matchup for him over the kind of the bad matchup of Josh Downs with the Colts, going against what people think are a good defense in the Cleveland Browns. It turns out that game becomes a shootout. And Indy actually gets the victory there. Cleveland somehow escaped with that one. But
it was basically Myles Garrett was single-handedly carried them to victory.
He dominated.
Yeah, it's just interesting. That's always a thing in fantasy football. It's players' talent versus their matchup is always like kind of a question when deciding what you want to do in terms of starting one player versus another. Does their talent outmatch their bad matchup, or is the matchup bad enough where this player might not be talented as the other player but might do better? I think that he kind of just got caught up in that. I would expect to see Josh Downs in the lineup going forward for Brian until he proves himself otherwise.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned the eye test, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, you got to see a player's talent. And Downs, when you watch him, he's an undersized guy. We saw his breakout come against the Ravens, actually, where he sort of came out of nowhere. But he's a small guy. He plays mostly in the slot. But actually, one or two of his big catches this previous week were not in the slot. They were actually on the outside. So he's clearly got speed. He's able to run routes both in the slot and out wide. And I think he's got a really solid acquisition. I don't know when he picked him up or how much he got him for. If he was anything close to free, he's $6. Huge steal. $6. So, hey, he's a player that if he was on waivers this week, may command closer to 20, potentially. So definitely a good pickup for Brian. And you're right. He will be in the lineup moving forward.
Right. And just the last thing on Josh Downs, he complements what they already have there in Indianapolis. You got Michael Pittman, the outside guy. You need that shifty slot guy, 5'9", 171 pounds, probably a burner. So, really good there. And Gardner Minshew is a competent NFL quarterback, so he will get him the ball. He has gotten the ball. I'm for sure see that continuing going forward. But let's go over to our next matchup here. It's not you yet.
We didn't talk about Jake's team.
Oh, Jake. I'm sorry, Jake. I don't know if Jake wants to talk about his team, but we will talk about your team here.
As forgettable as the 2023 Green Bay Packers, the Cumberland Countrymen. here with just 104 points. Sorry, I had to. It's too wide.
Don't pile on him, man. That's not right to do. But looking at his squad here, let's start with some of the good stuff here. Christian McCaffrey is still Christian McCaffrey. He's still good, I would say. Was that fair to say that Christian McCaffrey is good at fantasy football, is good at regular football?
I thought it was a rhetorical question. I didn't think it needed an answer. Right?
Oh, well, I was just going to go off on a limb there and say that he is good at football. 15 carries,
Pretty
45
good.
yards, and a touchdown. Also catches a touchdown against Minnesota. Rashad White here, not efficient, but does get involved in the passing game, which was kind of interesting. I don't think he's been that involved in games before this. This is the most targets he had, most receptions he's had in the game. So interesting to see there. Had 65 yards. So maybe that climbs up his value if he can continue to be involved in the passing game there in Tampa Bay. Chris Olave, who was recently arrested for speeding, 17 for 15, 57 yards. Love the targets. The efficiency is so poor. Derek Carr does not look more than 8 yards, it seems, when he's throwing the ball. That is a problem for Chris Olave, and I think it's going to continue to be a problem until they maybe go to famous Jameis, because that could be on the horizon if they keep losing football games there.
Hey, is there somebody on this roster that you recognize, Adam?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip over him real quick. No, but of course it's Mike Evans, who I recently traded to Jake here. Has a nice game here. 6 for 8, 82 yards, and a touchdown to lead his wide receivers in points. Good for Jake there. Christian Watson, now questionable again. I don't know if he left this game. He did. He injured his knee on the final drive. You hate to see that. 3 for 5, 27 yards. Remains to be seen what his status is for the next game, but definitely something Jake cannot have right now. Cole Kmet does a big fat 0. Don't like to see that. And then finally, Zach Moss here. Not a great day, but you have to be encouraged with 18 carries here. With Jonathan Taylor seemingly all the way back, Zach Moss still commands 18 carries here in Indianapolis. So you have to like that. There for Jake. In terms of his bench, Romeo Doubs definitely gets an uptick if Christian Watson is out for any period of time. I think we saw that while he was out. Romeo Doubs was a viable fantasy football receiver, so he might be back to that. And Najee Harris. So we always kind of crap on Najee Harris for not performing, whatever. 14 points here is season high. Gets involved here, scores a touchdown. Maybe look at his next 3 games here: Jacksonville, Tennessee, Green Bay. The Tennessee one's a little weird, but definitely Jacksonville you can run on, and I think he will run on them. I think next week probably might be his season high. I'm going to go on a limb here and say that he scores more than 14 points next week against Jacksonville. Definitely kind of interesting there. Still involved. And scores a touchdown. So, good kind of news for Jake. Maybe you start it. I guess the question is, this is the question for you. All right. So, Najee Harris plays Jacksonville. Zach Moss plays New Orleans. Who are you starting in the flex position? Out of those two?
It's close. My gut says, and it feels gross, but Najee Harris, in that matchup. It's interesting. They're both really consistent in their roles, it seems. I mean, that's 3 straight games for Najee with 14 carries on the nose. And Zach Moss, with Jonathan Taylor back, he's been 50% of snaps in each of the last 2 games. So snap percentage consistent there. He did take a big hit from where he was, obviously, prior to Taylor. But as you said, 18 for 57... that's nothing to shy away from. So
18 carries? Hell, that's better than a lot of the just starting wire. That's better than like Gus Edwards, I would say.
Yeah.
So
would you, or do you agree that you would give the edge to Harris at this point?
Probably. Yeah. Don't like Jacksonville's defense. I think their talent is around probably the same. And, now with Zach, I would say Zach Moss is probably more talented, but now with him sharing with Jonathan Taylor, you just don't want to get one of those, 8 carry games out of Zach Moss, which I don't think you're going to get that out of Najee Harris. I think his carries are a little more consistent going forward than Zach Moss. I'm still waiting for the, 6 carry, 23-yard game that I'm sure is looming. You just don't know when it's going to happen for Zach Moss. But now Jake goes 1-6 on the season. Probably the trade was a little too late to make a difference for the season, but he'll look to be a spoiler. Probably needs, exactly like I was saying with whose team? Alex's team. He probably needs to win out, or maybe he can lose one game to get into the playoffs. So very easy for Jake here. Just win out, and you got a shot. It's basically what that means there.
Yeah.
So
one just interesting note before we get off of Jake's team here. So Cole Kmet, the big zero. So
okay.
How do you explain that? So Fields is injured, right?
Yeah.
You've got new quarterback Tyson Bagent, right? Kind of an interesting player.
Went to
a very
college
obscure,
of Shepherd, West Virginia.
Yes. Not a whole lot of tape. I think they were talking about this on the broadcast. There's not a lot of tape on him, like his high school, college tape. It's like it's
Grady.
Some games they were talking about stats. They were talking about like attempts or something like that, and his district or whatever he played in didn't keep those stats for some reason, so they weren't able to even see what his stats were. But anyway, he's interesting here, and the Kmet zero is interesting because Bagent is a very his average depth of target in this game was like historically low. He was throwing short passes the entire game. So the fact that Cole Kmet, a tight end, was not able to sort of get in and on that action doesn't bode very well for Kmet, I think, in future weeks as Fields continues to be out, which I think he's expected to miss more time, right?
Checking that right now. He's doubtful for week 8.
Yeah, so that tells me 1 to 2 at least games.
He'll probably come back
this early in the week.
New Orleans.
Right. So just an interesting note there that Kmet is the only tight end on this team, and might be a sign for concern with the quarterback situation.
I think you just kind of roll with him. 89% snap count. He's on the field. This might just be a weird one. I don't know. I think that it's just weird because, like, with Bagent, like, it's his first game. He's just trying to, get through it and whatever. Does well, does get the win. I wouldn't say really does well, but does get the win here. I think you just got to keep running him out, and hopefully that, you get one of those Mark Andrews kind of Lamar Jackson things where they roll out and he just kind of flips it to the tight end, gets a touchdown on the day. So interesting there. Zeros, obviously, I like to see. Yeah.
It is. I should also say part of the reason for making that stretch from Kmet to Bagent is that if you've not seen Tyson Bagent, he is a very good-looking gentleman, very handsome guy. Anyway, kind of a look, kind of a vibe, kind of an aesthetic. So check him out.
Well, I'm sure you and Sarah will enjoy that very much.
Well, other people may or may not. I don't know, but his post-game interview is recommended viewing in this one. So.
All right. Well, let's go to our next matchup here, which is going to be Scott versus our low score of the week, Josh here. Josh got in his shotgun video, which you said was very boring. So there you go there. But Scott now goes to 4-3, 112.56 to 74.76. Josh now goes to 3-4 on the season. Let's start with Scott here. Starts Gus Edwards here. 14 for 64 and a touchdown, and then has that huge reception for 80 yards. 8.5 point play there against Detroit. So you like to see that. I don't know how much you're going to see that, but it was definitely a nice little cherry on top for Gus Edwards. Isaiah Pacheco kind of saves his day with a receiving touchdown there, gets 14 points. Michael Pittman, 2 for 5, but 83 yards and a touchdown. Made the most of his 2 touches there. Mark Andrews, starting to get it going here. 20-point day, 4 for 6, 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. As that Todd Monken offense gets more and more installed in the Ravens offense, I think you're going to be seeing more of this. So good for Scott there. Looking on his bench here, I feel like this is like a weekly conversation, but Tyler Algier, 21 carries. I mean, Bijan Robinson, was hurt, so that's kind of to be expected here. But 17, 13, 21 the last 3 weeks. Just very interesting. I don't know if you can start him, but it's just very interesting for Scott there. Goes with Russell Wilson here over Gardner Minshew, Gardner Minshew scores 27 points against a very, very good defense now. With the Cleveland Browns to Russell Wilson, 194 touchdown here. Denver has Kansas City, who they've already played before, and Russell Wilson had a 6.9. Gardner Minshew, if this desktop would stop doing that, it'd be great, has New Orleans next week. Who are you starting? And if you don't want to say, that's fine. I actually play
it's
them,
another.
so.
You keep asking me a lot of these gross ones.
Well, that's why.
This is really gross. I think I'm gonna go Wilson. I
Okay.
think you might be thinking I would go Minshew, but I think I'm gonna go Wilson. And the reason being is, Minshew's numbers are a little bit misleading. His 27 spot, right? 2 of those were rushing touchdowns. 2 of those big point scores in that game. So beyond that, look, this is a guy who threw 55 times the week prior and wound up with 9 fantasy points. So until I see it from him, we haven't really seen it consistently this year. I think he's got the potential, but I think I'm going to stick with Wilson. Minshew's just been too unpredictable.
I will say that Minshew has thrown for 300 yards in his past 2 games. Russell Wilson has only thrown 300 yards in week 2 and week 3. So definitely the yardage is there for Minshew, but I will not say anything in terms of starting because I am playing Scott this week, so I will just leave it at that.
The yardage is there, but so are the interceptions.
That's true.
4 in his last 2 games. So
That's true.
It should be.
Scott's now 4-3. On the way up here, had a lot of buys here. Tony Pollard, Hopkins here. Not a lot of buys, but 2 buys there. How are we feeling about the squad here? Running back looks kind of light. You have Tony Pollard, who's kind of been a disappointment. Isaiah Pacheco, who's been the opposite of Tony Pollard. It's kind of like he was low and now he's high, and now Tony Pollard's high and now he's low. Got a solid group of wide receivers. Cooper Kupp had a down day, but he should be fine. Michael Pittman and Amari Cooper. And then rounds it off with Mark Andrews. I think this is a very dangerous team going forward.
I think potentially. I still think his record's a pretty good indication, maybe a little bit better than average there for Scott. I don't know. I actually happen to think that the running back core is pretty solid.
Okay.
At least with Pacheco and Pollard. Yes, you're right. Pollard has underperformed, but I think between the 3 of them, Pacheco, Edwards, and Pollard, I think that's probably kind of what his record is, just above average, maybe. Cooper Kupp, I think we all expect that this was a weird one. 2 for 7, 29 yards, caught a 2-point conversion. But just the fact that Nacua has been so prolific, and even since Kupp has returned, the fact that, yes, this offense can support 2, 2.5, 3 wide receivers, but it's just a different thing when there's a second guy for Kupp. We've typically always seen him, with the exception of 1 year maybe, where he was the guy. He was the elite target for a couple years there. And I don't know. It just makes me a little bit nervous for a guy that you're drafting as like one of the best wide receivers in fantasy. There might be just enough competition to kind of knock him down a peg.
Yeah, I think that the days of, the 16, 17 targets might be over for Cooper Kupp just with Puka Nacua there. Kupp is the big name, so I think that he gets more of the attention from the defense, which opens up things for Nakua. I'm not probably as worried as you are, but definitely you're not going to see like the historic numbers that he was putting up. What was it, 2 years ago? Definitely not going to see that with this offense the way that it is put together as of now. So, Scott's now 4-3. I'm a little higher on his team than I would say you are, but it'll be interesting to see this week if he can give me a big fat first loss here. But going over to Josh,
by the way, he picked up Aaron Rodgers. Did we mention that?
Nope.
He's on IR. I guess the thought is he could return. He's making more progress with his surgery and his procedure than he initially projected. So probably still a long shot, but I guess it's a long shot worth filling your IR spot with.
Yeah, I talked to Scott about this a couple days ago, and he said that he believes that he will be back this season, maybe for the fantasy football playoffs. So, you have an IR spot open. Like, why not? Why not just take a flyer on somebody like that? But let's go over to Josh's squad.
Especially,
go ahead.
If the Jets are in contention, especially, which they could be at this point.
Josh's team here obviously got hit by the Mageddon here. Joe Burrow, Chuba Hubbard, Adam Thielen, Garrett Wilson, all on bye for Josh this week, and it showed in his total points as it was the low for this week. Geno Smith has a horrible day and a plus matchup, 13 for 24, 219, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 1 fumble lost. Austin Eckler, also a plus matchup, 14 for 45, nothing doing there against Kansas City. It was only 1 for 2 in the passing game, which is very weird for Austin Eckler. I don't know what was going on in terms of that, but in the 2 other games he played this season, he had 5 targets and 6 targets, so 2 targets all season low for him. Just kind of weird there. Decides to go with Latavius Murray. Hope that he just falls in the end zone. He does not. 4 for 8 and 2 for 2 in the air. It goes with Jaden Reed here. 3 for 4, 21 yards and a touchdown, so it does get in the end zone there. Brandon Ayuk kind of has an okay day. Here for Josh, it keeps on clicking off. I don't know why it keeps on doing that. Just kind of a rough day. He kind of probably, when he was looking at his schedule, probably knew this week was coming just with the amount of people that he had on bye, the amount of playmakers he had on bye. Just an unfortunate week, and, you come back next week, full force, trying to get your 4th win.
Yeah, for sure. Was hurt by the buys absolutely this week. And, I've always gone back and forth whether paying attention to buys in the draft. I think I've even mentioned it on the podcast. Like, do you try to spread them out? Do you try to just take an L one week? I mean, I've come to the point where I don't really pay attention to them at all during the draft. I try to stick to a take the best player approach. But anyway, just kind of interesting fodder for fantasy minds. But Austin Eckler here is, to me, a big concern. You miss him for 3 weeks this year. He has his bye in week 5. You get him back in week 6. And the last 2 weeks, 14 carries, maybe easing him back in, kind of 60s in snap percentage. But the big concern, especially this week, just 2 targets. I mean, Austin Eckler is one of these guys that we talked about earlier who get 9 for 10 every few weeks, that have these big target numbers. So it's just 6 targets in his return. Okay, fine, he's returning, but just 2 in this game. So I don't know. I just get bad vibes there, and the vibes have kind of spread to the rest of Josh's team. I mean, he's 3-4, but he has the fewest points this season by a lot.
That Austin Eckler is fully healthy?
It's hard to say, man. It really is. I mean, if he wasn't, 14 carries is still a lot of work. So, like, I don't know. It's weird.
I mean, and then Joshua Kelly, of course, goes 7 for 75 and a touchdown and had good burst on that run. He couldn't
do that when Eckler was on IR, but he comes and does that now. Just frustrating. 100%. Frustrating. Another frustration here, just by the way, Tyler Lockett. I mean, talk about underperforming players. He's now wide receiver number 46. He's really only had 2 games that went over 8 fantasy points.
Drafted in the fifth
They were
round.
big and drafted in the 5th round. So you can't. I mean, that's like wide receiver 4, like maybe benchable territory.
I want you to
with
look
those
this
numbers.
up. Was he drafted before Mike Evans?
Was he drafted before Mike Evans by Josh? Let's see. We are looking for. Sorry,
5.
this is
round 5.
Round 5. Yeah. Oh, Lockett. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, like,
Top.
that's just, what did he end up last year? I mean, last year he was wide receiver 13. So 46. He hasn't been that low since 2017.
Yeah,
So
rough. I mean,
just-
5 targets in a game in a good matchup without Metcalf in there.
Yeah.
Tough.
Isn't it weird to me that I think this is one of the rare situations where I think he would do better with Metcalf on the field? I don't think that he's the good only option.
Yeah.
I think that he's a good contrast to what Metcalf does. Metcalf will go up, get the contested balls, where Tyler Lockett's more of the finesse, speedy guy. I think that sooner Metcalf comes back, the better for him going forward.
Yeah, I guess we should mention he does in his flex spot start the wide receiver mate of Tyler Lockett with Metcalf out. It was the rookie Jackson Smith-Njigba, who much beloved by the fantasy community as a sort of rookie potential breakout. He gets the opportunity and he takes advantage of it. He goes 4 for 7, 63 and a touchdown. So at least Lockett's production was countered with Smith and Jigba's production for Josh, but just in a position where you even have to start both of those guys, just gross.
Yeah, definitely better days ahead for Josh with all these players now coming back from bye. Even, the mighty Adam Thielen coming back from bye. As we were kind of joking, he's the 7th ranked wide receiver after this bye, so definitely getting some firepower back for week 8. Going over to our last matchup, last but not least, probably the most exciting matchup of week 7 here. Really alive in the text chat. Here you go to 5-2 on the season with a 111.14 to 109.10 against Mike here. It was high drama there on Monday night. Hawkinson caught a ball. Then he got hurt, and I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to be out for the game? Then he comes back and catches another ball and gets you ahead. Really crazy sequence of events to end this fantasy matchup. But let's look at some of the other things here. Deontay Foreman, my goodness, what a savvy little pickup there for you. 16 carries, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a receiving touchdown on the day. Saquon Barkley, 21 carries, 77 yards, and a touchdown. Does have a fumble loss in this, but you're looking at the score of 14-7, and you can get 17 points out of your running back there. You'd love to see that. He was involved early and often there. For the Giants, the really ugly part of this team is the wide receivers here. You had CeeDee Lamb on bye, Nico Collins on bye, and DK Metcalf on bye. They're probably all starting over these 3 wide receivers that you did start this week. Kadarius Toney, 1 for 1. Calvin Ridley, who I didn't like pre-draft. You were much higher on him than I was. 1 for 4, 5 yards there. Now is wide receiver 35 on the year. And Rashid Shaheed only gets 5 points there. So, you get the win here with a lot of people on bye. So good on you for that. And I think that if you do win this thing, you might come back to this week and say, wow, this was like the week that, really got me going here, being able to squeak out a win against Mike here. That's what I was thinking last night.
Well, you say only 5 points for Shaheed, and I'm thinking, man, I needed every single one of those 5 freaking points to come out with a very close victory in exciting fashion on Monday. I'm slowly coming to 2 realizations about this team, and both of them are unfortunate, to say the least. One of them is that Calvin Ridley just isn't working out thus far for Jacksonville. And he may not be in the lineup for me next week. It's very possible that is the case with no buys in the NFL next week.
All right, well, hold on. Let's wait a second here, because you're already starting Metcalf if he plays and CeeDee Lamb.
Assuming
so
Metcalf
Nico
plays,
Collins
right.
versus Carolina, or Calvin Ridley versus I think it was
doesn't matter.
Pittsburgh.
Nico. It's Nico. I think it's Nico.
Yeah.
I think it is. I mean, Ridley is too unpredictable right now. Nico's a top, low end. High end wide receiver too at this point. So the second realization I've come to, and this one is maybe even worse than Calvin Ridley, Saquon Barkley and Adam Jones. Aaron Jones. Adam Jones is a baseball player. Aaron Jones are never going to be 100% healthy.
You're starting Adam Jones at the running back position. That's probably why you're having so much trouble there.
Yeah, that would definitely be. Although I don't know,
he might be better.
But those two guys, Barkley and Jones, just won't be healthy 100% at the same time in any game this year. It hasn't happened yet. Aaron Jones is still not right. Barkley left this game with, or maybe didn't leave it, I don't know, but it was hyperextended his elbow or something like that.
Yeah.
They're thinking he'll be back, but I'm just not going to have those guys fully 100%. And that sucks because I was really relying on those two being my two horses that could score 25 points, on a week and help me to victory.
I'm way more concerned about Aaron Jones here, just because. Behind Saquon, you have Matt Breida. I mean, Matt Breida is just a guy. You can find them on the street in terms of running backs. But, A.J. Dillon is a competent backup. I think that he is good enough to be able to carry a load if Aaron Jones is hurt or is limited. So I really think that hurts his value way more than Saquon. Saquon, they're going to run into the ground. They have him for 1 year. They're going to run him into the ground. They don't really care.
But he keeps getting hurt, so that's I don't know.
But I still think that he's. I'm not going to say he's tougher than Aaron Jones. I just think that he feels like there's more responsibility because, he's the only guy there. Which I feel like Aaron Jones, you have A.J. Dillon back there, so the coaching staff could be like, well, we still have a viable guy, so let's give Aaron Jones some limited work. Just kind of my thoughts there. But you are 5-2. I mean. Second best record in the league. Cannot fault you for that.
James Conner on IR also, so will return. I think he will be eligible. I think he's got 2 more weeks, 2 more games on IR, and then is eligible to return. So,
and I will say, it was the worst game of the season for Tua here. Better days ahead for him. You got New England next week, who he didn't have a great week against them week 2, but does get Kansas City there. That should be a shootout. That should be a really entertaining game. Unfortunately, that's going to be at 9:30 because they're playing it in Germany. So we're not going to be able to really enjoy that as much as we want. I'm really upset about that. But
Wait, hold on. I know this is a long podcast, but we have to pause it here. What's wrong with 9:30 a.m. football? I love it.
I like to sleep.
And you have kids, I guess that makes a difference.
Yeah, kids, and I like to, get my pizza, my lunch ready, and while I'm watching the games, watching Red Zone and stuff like that. And it would have been the perfect nightcap for a Sunday night football game. Miami versus Kansas City would have been, that would have been chef's kiss there.
All I could think of when you were doing the little pizza skit was you know what I'm about to say. Officers, I got your pizza.
Third floor. We're not gonna start.
Okay, we're not gonna do it. It's too late for that.
It's way too late.
I don't know. I love the Sunday morning games. I think it's exciting. I'm like, my gosh, I don't just get to watch 3 games today. I get to watch 4. I love it.
Yeah. Let's go over to Mike's one here, who barely lost this game here. Really a heartbreaker for him there. Josh Allen has a good game here, 27 of 41, 2 touchdowns. Does have an interception, but does have a rushing touchdown as well. Kind of an up and down game for him in their loss against New England. Travis Etienne continues to be a monster. 14 carries, 53 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's getting that goal line work that he did not have last year, and it's really paying off. Now his 3rd straight game with 2 rushing touchdowns. So love to see it there. Number 3 running back in fantasy football. Brian Robinson does get in the end zone here, which saves his day, 8 for 23 and a touchdown. Michael Thomas. Yay, Michael Thomas. We were talking about him. Did not have a touchdown, but had a touchdown this week. Didn't have a touchdown all of this year. Finally gets in the end zone here. 3 for 7, 42 yards and a touchdown. Christian Kirk, which is like the opposite of Calvin Ridley here. 6 for 6, 90 yards and a touchdown. Fumble lost, which I think saved your matchup. He didn't have that fumble loss. He probably would have won. No, he would have lost by like 0.3, but that's crazy. DJ Moore still involved in the passing attack, even with the backup quarterback here. 8 for 9, 54 yards. You don't like to see that, but you like to see the targets the rookie quarterback is looking for him. So that is good news there. And I think the biggest story here is Riley Patterson having a big old 0. If he kicks 1 field goal, this matchup goes in the other direction. So, they had a chance to, kick an extra point, maybe to kick a field goal there. They did not do it. They went for it on 4th down a ton. So very, very lucky for you, I would say. This is a team with Devin Achane and Justin Jefferson hurt. Mike is now 4-3. Obviously, one of the most dangerous teams, but this has been a theme going forward. Can they tread water while these 2 playmakers are out? 4-3, you don't like to see that. It's just going to be very iffy for the next couple of weeks.
It is, and I think we've said as long as Mike can weather the storm with these injuries and be 500 or better, by the time he gets Achane and Jefferson back, if he's in position, he is well positioned to make a deep run in the fantasy playoffs this season. I think, if not the most talented, at least one of the top talented teams in this league. I look across this lineup, this roster, and I think, man, there's a lot of decisions that he'll have when some of these guys get healthy, because he's got a lot of guys that are performing really well and filling the gap. DJ Moore has been really spectacular this season. We'll see what the quarterback situation is going to do for him. He caught 8 balls with the rookie Bajan in the other day, so that's good news there. Michael Thomas, is there a more consistent, just 7 to 10 points? You get 11. You get a little bonus point this week against Jacksonville, but some plus matchups coming up for Thomas. Don't know if Olave, we don't know very much at this point. Don't know if he's going to miss any games.
I don't think so. It was just a speeding thing. He was 35 miles per hour over the speed limit, which becomes a reckless driving. But there was no alcohol involved. It doesn't appear, so I think that everything's fine with that.
Okay, so we'll see. But regardless, there's so much talent on this team. So tough, really tough to lose in the way that Mike lost.
Yeah.
But we've all been on that side of things as well. But encouraged by a lot up and down this lineup. And this is not even getting the most yet out of Josh Allen in this game. 24 fantasy points. He left points on the board, frankly, in that game. They lost to a bad New England team.
Yeah.
So Blake's just fine, I think.
Yeah, still the number 1 overall player in fantasy football, Josh Allen. So, did leave points on the board, but is still number 1 on the year. So that is our show. This is definitely our longest show of the season. So I appreciate you all listening in, and hit the like and subscribe button. The show's
not the only thing that gets longer when Taylor Swift is around.
or Badgett, apparently.
Or Badgett, that's right.
So
that's right.
We are trying to do some different things with the podcast, so be on the lookout for that. We're not sure if it's going to happen, but we're in the works. So make sure that you listen in on every Tuesday for the best fantasy football content money can't buy, because we don't get paid. So we will see you next week. Enjoy the week. Enjoy Thursday Night Football. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.